You may have seen the arrest video, but you haven't seen what happened next. A police officer thought he was making a routine arrest of a Navy sailor. He was wrong. Within minutes, the highest levels of the United States Department of Defense were directly involved. This video reveals the behind-the-scenes power struggle. How did
The black asphalt of Nevada State Route 375, the extraterrestrial highway, shimmered under a 2 p.m. June sun. It was 112 degrees in the shade, but there was no shade, just cracked desert floor, distant mesas, and a sky so vast and blue it felt like an ocean turned upside down. Lieutenant Commander Adrian Ace Foster, call sign Ghost 1, gripped the wheel of his classic 1969 Ford Mustang. The engine was a low, contented rumble. For the first time in 96 hours, he wasn't pulling 7 Gs in an F/A-18 Super Hornet or debriefing a squadron of the world's best pilots. He was just a man, driving a car, heading home after a 4-day intensive training cycle at Naval Air Station Fallon, the home of Top Gun. His flight suit was traded for civilian clothes, jeans and a simple gray t-shirt. The only hint of his profession was the military-grade Oakley sunglasses shielding his eyes and the crisp, disciplined way he held his shoulders, even at rest. He saw the flashing lights in his rearview mirror before he heard the siren. A white and blue patrol car from the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department was closing fast. Foster's mind, trained to process threats in fractions of a second, did a quick system check. Speed? Exactly 65 miles per hour, the posted limit. Lane discipline? Perfect. He signaled, smoothly pulling the Mustang onto the gravel shoulder. The air conditioning fought a losing battle against the heat radiating through the windshield. The patrol car pulled in behind him, its lights painting his mirror in strobing flashes of red and blue. He cut the engine, placed his hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, and waited. That was the procedure. Comply, de-escalate, control the environment. The officer who approached his window was young, maybe 30 or 31. His name tag read B. Larson. He had a short, military-style haircut that didn't match the soft, unlined face. He moved with a swagger that felt practiced, his hand resting near the butt of his Glock. He tapped on the window with a gloved knuckle. Foster powered it down. A wave of superheated air rolled into the car. "Afternoon," Officer Larson said. His voice was flat, devoid of warmth. "You know why I pulled you over?" "Negative, officer, I do not," Foster replied. His tone was even, respectful, the kind of voice that could calmly talk a fellow pilot through an engine failure at 30,000 feet. "Your right rear taillight is out." Foster glanced in his rearview mirror. It was working when he did his pre-drive check that morning. A bulb could have burned out. "I see. I apologize, officer. I'll get that fixed as soon as I get to town." "License and registration," Larson commanded, ignoring the apology. Foster nodded slowly. "Of course, officer." He maintained eye contact, telegraphing his every move. "My wallet is in my right back pocket. My registration is in the glove box. I'm going to reach for them now." He moved with deliberate slowness, retrieving his wallet first. He handed over his Nevada driver's license. Then he leaned over and opened the glove compartment. Alongside the vehicle registration and insurance card was a slim black case. Inside it, nestled in foam, was a Sig Sauer P320, his personal firearm, unloaded. He also had a concealed carry permit. He took out the registration and insurance, leaving the case untouched. He handed the documents to Larson. Larson's eyes flicked from the papers to Foster's face, then to his hands, then back to the license. His gaze lingered on the small, almost unnoticeable text. Veteran. He then looked back into the car, his eyes narrowing as he spotted the edge of the black pistol case. "You got a weapon in the car?" "Yes, officer, in the glove box. It is unloaded in a locked case as required by state law. I also have a valid concealed carry permit, which I can provide if you'd like." Foster's voice remained a calm, steady baritone. A flicker of something, annoyance, suspicion, crossed Larson's face. "Stay right there." He walked back to his patrol car. The minutes stretched out. Foster sat perfectly still, hands on the wheel, watching the heat haze dance above the asphalt. He could see Larson in his car talking on the radio. The man wasn't just running his plates. This was taking too long. This felt different. Larson returned. He held Foster's license and registration in his hand, but his posture had changed. It was more rigid, more confrontational. Adrian Foster, says here you're a veteran. What branch? United States Navy, officer. Doing what? The question was sharp, an interrogation. I'm a pilot, sir. Larson let out a short, humorless laugh, a little puff of condescension in the desert heat. A pilot? Right. You look a little old to be playing Maverick, buddy. Foster's training screamed at him to remain neutral, show no emotion. I'm an instructor at Naval Air Station Fallon, a lieutenant commander. The officer's eyes scanned the interior of the Mustang, the classic American muscle car, then looked back at the man in the simple t-shirt. In his mind, it didn't add up. Pilots, especially Top Gun instructors, were supposed to be arrogant, cocky. This man was too calm, too controlled. It felt like an act. Larson had grown up in this small Nevada town, watching the fighter jets rip across the sky. He saw them as gods, untouchable and arrogant. He joined law enforcement to have his own piece of that authority, to be the one in control on the ground. This quiet, respectful man in an old car didn't fit his stereotype of a high-flying naval aviator. The discrepancy irritated him. It felt like a challenge to his authority. You got any ID to prove that? Larson's voice had an edge now, a challenge. Yes, officer, Foster said, maintaining his calm. My common access card, my military ID is in my wallet. I can show it to you. Let me see it. Foster reached back to his pocket where his wallet now was, but before his fingers could touch the leather, Larson's voice cracked through the air like a whip. Freeze! Hands on the dash! Now! Foster's muscles tensed. His heart rate, usually a steady 60 beats per minute, kicked up to 80. This was a critical moment, the inflection point. Officer, you just asked for my ID, he stated, not as a question but as a fact. His hands moved slowly, deliberately to the dashboard, palms up. I see a gun case. You start reaching around. You think I'm stupid? Larson's hand was now resting firmly on his firearm. Step out of the vehicle, slowly. Foster took a slow, deep breath, the superheated air stinging his lungs. He complied. He opened the door, swung his legs out, and stood up, his 6'2" frame unfolding from the low-slung car. He kept his hands raised and visible. The sun was blinding. The silence of the desert was absolute, broken only by the hum of the patrol car's engine. Turn around, hands behind your back. Officer Larson, Foster said, his voice still impossibly calm. You are making a mistake. The only mistake here, Larson spat back, pulling out his handcuffs, is you thinking you can lie to a police officer. The cold steel clicked shut around Adrian Foster's wrists. The metallic sound was sharp and final in the vast, empty landscape. The heat radiating off the patrol car's hood was intense. The handcuffs were tight, the serrated edges digging into the bones of Lieutenant Commander Foster's wrists. For 12 years as a naval aviator, his hands had been his life. They had manipulated throttles, adjusted weapon systems, and guided a $60 million aircraft onto the deck of a moving carrier in the dead of night. Now, they were bound behind his back by a man who wouldn't listen to reason. Larson performed a rough pat-down, his hands lingering on Foster's wallet. He pulled it from Foster's back pocket, flipping it open. Let's see this military ID, Larson sneered. He pulled out the common access card. It was unmistakable. Foster's full-color photo was on the left, next to a holographic seal of the Department of Defense. His name, rank, LCDR Foster, Adrian M., and service, U.S. Navy, were clearly printed. An embedded RFID chip was visible under the surface. It was a piece of federal identification nearly impossible to forge. Larson stared at it. He looked at the photo, then at the man standing in front of him. The faces matched perfectly. For a moment, Foster thought the absurdity of the situation would finally dawn on the officer. He was wrong. Larson looked at the ID, then back at Foster, a strange look of cognitive dissonance on his face. He'd committed to a course of action, and backing down now would be an admission of error. To a man like Larson, that was a greater failure than being wrong. "These are easy to fake," he said, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. He shoved the wallet and ID into his own pocket. "You can tell it to the sheriff." He grabbed Foster's arm, the grip unnecessarily firm, and steered him toward the back of the patrol car. The vinyl seats were scorching hot, and the air inside was thick and stale. Larson pushed him inside, the movement lacking any professional courtesy. The door slammed shut, and the world was reduced to what Foster could see through the reinforced glass and metal cage. Larson walked back to the Mustang. He opened the glove box and pulled out the gun case. He then began a search of the vehicle. It was a violation of procedure, a search without a warrant or probable cause. Foster watched, his mind a whirlwind of protocol and procedure. He wasn't angry. Anger was a useless emotion in a tactical situation. He was processing, analyzing, planning his next move. The one thing his training had drilled into him above all else was to never, ever give up control if you had a single option left. And he had one option left. Larson finished his pointless search and got back into the driver's seat. The engine revved, and the car pulled back onto the highway, leaving the classic Mustang sitting alone on the shoulder, a ghost in the desert sun. "I have the right to one phone call," Foster stated from the back. It wasn't a request, it was a declaration of established rights. Larson glanced in the rearview mirror, a smug look on his face. "Sure you do, Commander. You can call your lawyer when we get you processed." "That's not the call I'm going to make," Foster said calmly. "The law states I get a call. It doesn't specify to whom. My phone is in my left front pocket. You're going to take it out, you're going to unlock it with my facial ID, and you're going to dial the number I give you. You're going to put it on speaker and place it on the center console." Larson laughed. "You're in no position to be giving orders." Foster's voice dropped, losing its respectful tone and gaining a hard, steely edge that Larson had never heard before. It was the voice of a man in command. "Officer, listen to me very carefully. You have detained an active-duty, forward-deployable strategic asset of the United States Navy without cause. You have disregarded federal identification. You are currently operating outside the bounds of your authority. The situation you are in is escalating with every minute you refuse to comply. The phone call is for your benefit as much as it is for mine. It is your single opportunity to de-escalate this situation before it is taken out of your hands entirely. Now, are you going to give me my phone call?" Something in his tone, the absolute certainty, the lack of fear, finally pierced Larson's bubble of self-assurance. A sliver of doubt crept in. What if this guy was telling the truth? The paperwork would be a nightmare. Maybe it was better to let him make the call. If it was a bluff, it would be amusing. If not, well, he could deal with that later. Gritting his teeth, Larson stopped the car, got out, and retrieved the phone from Foster's pocket. He held it up to Foster's face through the cage partition. It unlocked. "Who you callin'? Mommy?" "Dial this number," Foster said, reciting 10 digits from memory. It wasn't a number for a lawyer's office or a family member. It was the 24/7 operations desk at NAS Fallon, the nerve center of the base. Larson dialed. He put the phone on speaker and tossed it onto the console. The phone rang twice. A voice, clipped and professional, answered. "NAS Fallon Command Operations, Master Chief Shaw speaking." Larson was about to speak, to identify himself as the sheriff's department, but Foster spoke first, his voice clear and strong, filling the small space. "Watchtower, this is Ghost 1. I have a broken arrow." There was a pause on the other end of the line, not of confusion, but of sudden razor-sharp focus. The term broken arrow was a code. In its official capacity, it meant a nuclear weapon accident, lost or stolen. But within the tightly knit aviation community at Fallon, it had a secondary, unofficial meaning, known only to a select few. An essential pilot, a strategic asset, has been compromised in a non-combat civilian environment. It was the ultimate red flag, a signal that bypassed all normal procedures and triggered an immediate high-level response. Master Chief Petty Officer Shaw's voice came back, and all traces of routine were gone. It was now cold, hard steel. Ghost 1, confirm your status. Are you under duress? That is affirmative, Watchtower. I am in the custody of Lincoln County Sheriff's Department Officer B. Larson, currently southbound on Route 375. Roger that, Ghost 1. Stand by, we are taking control. The line didn't go dead. It remained open, but Master Chief Shaw was no longer just a man on the phone. He was activating a protocol that few had ever seen used, a chain of events that would move with astonishing speed from a dusty Nevada highway to the highest corridors of power in the nation. Officer Blake Larson had no idea what he had just set in motion. He thought he had arrested a cocky liar. In reality, he had just tripped a silent alarm that was now screaming inside the Department of Defense. Master Chief Petty Officer David Shaw had spent 28 years in the Navy. He had seen everything. He'd been the senior enlisted leader on an aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf and had run flight deck operations during Desert Storm. Now, as the operations chief for NAS Fallon, his job was to be the steady, unshakable hub of a wheel that spun at 1,000 miles per hour. When the call came in, he didn't flinch. He didn't question. The words Ghost 1 and Broken Arrow were a specific key for a specific lock. He had drilled the procedure a dozen times in simulations, but had never once used it for a real-world event. Until now. While keeping the line open with Foster's phone, Shaw used a secondary secure line. His first call was not to the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office. That would be a waste of time. He knew that trying to reason with a local deputy who had already gone this far was like arguing with a brick wall. Local jurisdictions had their own pride, their own chain of command. To untangle this, you didn't pull on the thread from the bottom. You pulled it from the very top. His finger jabbed a button on his secure console labeled CMD for Base Commander. The call went straight to the private line of Captain Eva Rostova. Captain Rostova was in the middle of a skiff, a sensitive compartmented information facility, reviewing satellite intelligence for an upcoming red flag exercise. She was 48 years old, a former F-14 Tomcat pilot with more than 4,000 flight hours. She was known for her icy calm under pressure and her complete intolerance for incompetence. When her private line buzzed, a sound no one in the room had heard in months, she excused herself without explanation and took the call in an attached, soundproofed office. "Rostova," she answered. "Ma'am, Master Chief Shaw at Command Ops. We have a broken arrow." The captain's posture straightened. All thoughts of satellite data vanished. "Report." "It's Ghost 1, ma'am. Lieutenant Commander Foster. He is under civilian arrest. Lincoln County Sheriff's Department. He's in the back of a patrol car on 375. Rostova's mind worked like a battlefield computer. Foster wasn't just any pilot. He was one of only 3 active-duty instructors qualified to teach the new 5th-generation adversary tactics program. He was a living repository of tactical knowledge, a strategic asset worth more than the half-dozen jets sitting on her flight line. The knowledge in his head was critical to national security. Having him held incommunicado in some rural county jail was not a jurisdictional squabble. It was a threat. "Have you made contact with the Sheriff's Department?" she asked, already knowing and approving of the answer. "Negative, Captain," Shaw replied. "My judgment was that direct contact at this stage would be ineffective and potentially inflammatory. Following protocol, I elevated immediately to you." "Correct call, Master Chief," Rostova said. "Keep that line with Foster open. Do not lose him. I'm taking it from here." She hung up. Her next move would determine everything. Like Shaw, she knew that calling the local sheriff would be a mistake. The sheriff would get defensive. He'd back his deputy. It would devolve into a jurisdictional pissing match that could take hours, even days, to resolve. They didn't have days. They didn't have hours. She pulled out her personal encrypted cell phone. She scrolled through a contact list that was short and contained some of the most powerful numbers in the U.S. military. She bypassed the commander of the Pacific Fleet. She bypassed the Chief of Naval Operations. She needed to go to the source of immediate, undeniable authority, a name she hadn't called in over a year: Rear Admiral Cole "Bulldog" Bennett. He was the Deputy Director for Global Operations on the Joint Staff, the J3. In layman's terms, he was one of the men who ran America's wars from a basement in the Pentagon. More importantly, Adrian Foster had been Bennett's wingman a decade ago. He had personally recommended Foster for the Top Gun instructor slot. Back in the patrol car, Officer Larson was starting to feel a growing sense of unease. The open phone line on the console was silent, but it felt heavy, like he was being listened to by something vast and unseen. He could hear the faint, tinny sound of someone typing on the other end. "Who was that?" Larson asked, trying to sound authoritative but failing. "That was Master Chief Shaw," Foster replied from the back, his voice calm. "He runs the operations center at my base." "And what's he gonna do?" Larson scoffed. "Send a fighter jet to rescue you?" "No, officer," Foster said. "He's not. He's just a professional doing his job. He's making a phone call." Larson didn't know how right he was. He didn't know that the Master Chief's call to the base commander was an act of precision, like a key turning in a lock. And he couldn't possibly imagine the door that lock was about to open. He was a local cop who had made a traffic stop on a dusty highway. He believed he was in complete control of the situation. He was about to find out that he wasn't even a player in the game. He was just the piece on the board that was about to be swept aside. The call from Master Chief Shaw hadn't just gone up the chain of command. It had been launched like a missile, and Captain Eva Rostova was about to give it a target. The Pentagon is a city unto itself, a five-sided fortress of bureaucracy and power. Deep within its most secure levels, in a windowless room known as the National Military Command Center, Rear Admiral Cole "Bulldog" Bennett was listening to a briefing on naval movements in the South China Sea. At 55, Bennett was the personification of naval authority. His face was a road map of deployments and long watches, and his eyes had a piercing quality that made subordinates feel like they were being X-rayed. His encrypted cell phone, a device that was supposed to be used only in the gravest of national emergencies, vibrated in his pocket. He glanced at the caller ID. Rostova, Eva, the base commander at Fallon. She wouldn't be calling this number unless a meteor was about to hit her base. He stood, nodding an apology to the four-star general giving the brief, and stepped into a small, sound-dampened alcove. "Cole Bennett." "Admiral, this is Captain Rostova at Fallon. Sir, I apologize for the intrusion." "Get on with it, Ava," Bennett said, his voice a low growl. "Sir, we have a broken arrow. It's Lieutenant Commander Foster, Ace." The Admiral's blood ran cold. "Is he alive?" "Yes, sir, he is. He's been taken into custody by a Lincoln County, Nevada sheriff's deputy. Traffic stop. Deputy is non-compliant and has disregarded military identification. Ace is currently in the back of the patrol vehicle." Bennett closed his eyes for a second, a storm of fury gathering behind them. A Top Gun instructor, his former wingman, in handcuffs because of some power-tripping local cop. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an insult to the uniform and a security risk. The tactical knowledge in Foster's head was perishable and priceless. Every hour he spent in a jail cell was an hour that knowledge wasn't being passed on to the pilots who needed it to survive in combat. "What's the deputy's name?" Bennett's voice was dangerously quiet. "Officer B. Larson, sir. We have an open line with Foster's phone now. We are monitoring." "Good," Bennett said. "Don't talk to the locals. Don't send anyone down there. Do not escalate from your end. This is now a J3 matter. I will handle it. Expect a call on your secure line within 15 minutes with instructions. Is that understood?" "Crystal clear, Admiral," Rostova replied. "Good work, Ava." Bennett ended the call. He didn't go back into the briefing. He strode out of the command center and down a hallway, his mind sorting through options at lightning speed. He could call the governor of Nevada. He could call the FBI. Both were viable but slow. They involved requests, bureaucracy, and interagency protocols. He needed a hammer, not a scalpel. He needed to make one phone call that would cascade down with such force that no one would dare question it. He walked into his office, closed the door, and picked up his secure STU-3 telephone. He dialed a number that connected him to the Department of the Navy's liaison office for state and local law enforcement. This was the office that handled joint task forces, information sharing, and, on rare occasions, jurisdictional friction. He didn't ask for the director. He asked for the director's senior legal counsel, a civilian lawyer named Mark Ellison, who had a reputation for being a shark. "Mark, it's Admiral Bennett." "Admiral, what can I do for you?" Ellison's voice was wary. Admirals didn't call him for casual chats. "I need you to make a call to the Nevada State Director of Public Safety. You are to inform him, not request, that an active-duty naval officer, Lieutenant Commander Adrian Foster, has been unlawfully detained by a Lincoln County Sheriff's deputy named Larson. You are to convey that this is now a matter of national security interest. The Lieutenant Commander is to be released unconditionally and immediately. His personal effects, including his vehicle, are to be returned without prejudice. Failure to comply will result in the immediate intervention of the Department of Justice and the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. Am I clear?" There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end. Ellison was used to dealing with friction, but this was an order of a different magnitude. This was the Pentagon declaring checkmate. "Admiral, is there a specific charge or threat?" "The charge," Bennett cut in, his voice like ice, "is that a local deputy has decided his authority supersedes that of the United States military in the disposition of its critical assets. That is not a situation the Department of Defense finds tenable. You have your instructions, Mark. Make the call." Bennett hung up the phone. He knew exactly what would happen next. Ellison, a civilian lawyer, would translate his military directive into the precise legal language that would terrify a state-level bureaucrat. The State Director of Public Safety, upon hearing words like Department of Justice and national security interest from a Pentagon lawyer, would not delegate. He would personally call the Lincoln County Sheriff. And the Lincoln County Sheriff, a man who was probably enjoying a quiet Saturday, was about to have his world turned upside down by a phone call that originated in a Pentagon war room. The chain of command was now working in reverse, from the highest echelons of federal power down to a single, unsuspecting county sheriff. For Officer Blake Larson, time was running out. He just didn't know it yet. Sheriff Frank Miller liked Saturdays. The paperwork was light, the phones were quiet, and he could usually catch up on the budget reports that piled up during the week. He was a 30-year veteran of law enforcement, a man who believed in common sense, clear communication, and backing his deputies. He was pouring his second cup of coffee when the private line on his desk, the one that bypassed the dispatchers, rang with an urgency that made the hairs on his arms stand up. The caller ID showed a number from the state capitol in Carson City. "Sheriff Miller," he answered. "Frank, it's Director Evans," the voice on the other end said. It was Bill Evans, the Nevada State Director of Public Safety. He sounded stressed. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. I just got off the phone with the Department of the Navy's legal counsel. I need to know the status of a United States Navy Lieutenant Commander named Adrian Foster." Miller felt a knot tighten in his stomach. That was not a name he knew. "I'm not aware of any—" "Hold on, Bill." He covered the receiver and yelled out to the front desk. "Janet, do we have an Adrian Foster in custody or en route?" He heard the click of keyboard keys, then his sergeant's voice. "Just got a call from Deputy Larson a few minutes ago. He's got a guy says his name is Foster in the car with him. Pulled him over on 375, bringing him in for suspicion of impersonating a military officer." Miller's blood ran cold. He took his hand off the receiver. "Bill, my deputy is bringing him in now. He was arrested for impersonating an officer." The silence on the other end was deafening. When Director Evans spoke again, his voice was strained, as if he were choosing every word to prevent a catastrophe. "Frank, you need to understand something. The man in that car is not impersonating anyone. He is a high-level strategic asset for the United States Navy. I have just received a direct, non-negotiable order from the Pentagon via their legal counsel. This is not a request. You are to instruct your deputy to release Lieutenant Commander Foster immediately, unconditionally. His cuffs are to be taken off, he is to be apologized to, and he is to be driven back to his vehicle. This is to happen right now. Miller sank into his chair. In 30 years, he had never received an order like this. The Pentagon. Not the FBI, not the Marshals, but the Department of Defense itself. An order that didn't go through channels but came crashing down from the sky. Bill, my deputy, believed he had probable cause, Miller started, the instinct to defend his man kicking in. I don't care if your deputy saw him levitate, Evans cut in, his voice sharp. This is above probable cause. This is a national security issue. I am giving you a lawful order, Frank. Order your man to stand down. Now. Or the next call you get will be from the U.S. Attorney's Office and they won't be as polite as I'm being. Do you understand me? I understand, Miller said, his voice grim. The message was clear. His deputy had kicked a hornet's nest, and the entire swarm was coming down on their heads. I'll handle it. He hung up and immediately got on the radio. Dispatch, get me Deputy Larson on his cell. Patch him through to my desk, now. A few seconds later, the line clicked. Larson here. Blake, this is Sheriff Miller. Where are you? About 10 miles out from the station, Sheriff. Got that military impersonator in the back. Miller closed his eyes. Son, I want you to listen to me. I want you to pull over, right now. There was a pause. Sheriff, is everything all right? No, Blake, it is not, Miller said, his voice a low growl of controlled fury. The man in your back seat is exactly who he says he is. I just got a call from the state director who got a call from the Pentagon. You are to take his handcuffs off. You are to apologize to him, and you are to give him a ride back to his car. You will not ask him any more questions. You will not run his name again. You will do exactly as I have told you. Is that clear? The silence from Larson's end was filled with a dawning horror. He looked into his rearview mirror. The man in the back, Lieutenant Commander Foster, was looking at him, his expression unreadable. The open phone was still on the console, a silent witness. Larson realized with a sickening certainty that the man in his back seat hadn't been making a call for help. He had been launching a counterstrike, a strike that had just hit its target. Sheriff, I had reason to believe. You believed wrong, Miller roared, his composure finally snapping. Now turn that car around and fix the mess you've made. That is a direct order, deputy. Larson's bravado evaporated, replaced by the cold, clammy fear of a man who has just realized he is in over his head. Deep, deep over his head. He stammered, Yes, Sheriff, and ended the call. He pulled the car over, the tires kicking up dust. He sat there for a moment, the sheriff's words echoing in his ears. The Pentagon. He had managed to piss off the Pentagon. He turned around, his face pale. He looked at the naval officer, at the calm, steady eyes that held no fear and no satisfaction. Just a profound, unnerving stillness. The power dynamic inside that patrol car had just been reversed with the force of a tidal wave. The drive back to the Mustang was the longest 10 miles of Officer Blake Larson's life. The silence in the patrol car was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the radio and the hum of the air conditioning. Lieutenant Commander Foster had said nothing since the sheriff's call, his presence in the back seat a quiet, powerful indictment. When they reached the Mustang, sitting patiently on the shoulder under the oppressive sun, Larson got out and opened the rear door. His hands fumbled with the key for the handcuffs. As the steel cuffs sprang open, he saw the red, raw marks they had left on Foster's wrists. Commander, I apologize, Larson stammered. The words felt like ash in his mouth. Foster simply rubbed his wrists, his gaze fixed on his car. He didn't acknowledge the apology. It was too late for apologies. The machine was already in motion. My wallet and my phone, officer. Larson retrieved the items and handed them over. Foster checked to make sure everything was there, then walked to his Mustang and got in. The engine turned over with a satisfying roar. Without a backward glance, he pulled onto the highway and drove away, leaving Larson standing alone in a cloud of dust and the wreckage of his career. Larson drove back to the station in a daze. When he walked in, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Sheriff Miller was waiting for him in his office. Standing beside him was Watch Commander Sergeant Frank Miller, no relation to the sheriff, but a man who commanded just as much respect. Sergeant Miller was a 20-year Marine Corps veteran, a man who had served 2 tours in Iraq before becoming a cop. He knew a real military ID when he saw one, and his face was a mask of cold disappointment. "Close the door, Blake," the sheriff said, his voice dangerously low. "Hand me your body camera and the dash cam unit from your vehicle." It wasn't a request. Larson unclipped the small black camera from his uniform and retrieved the data card from his car's dash cam system. He placed them on the sheriff's desk. They felt like stones. "Tell me what happened," the sheriff said. Larson recounted the story, his voice shaky, trying to frame his actions as justifiable caution. He spoke of the gun case, of the pilot's unusual calm, of his gut feeling that something was off. The more he talked, the more pathetic he sounded, even to himself. Sergeant Miller listened, his arms crossed. When Larson finished, the sergeant spoke for the first time, his voice gravelly. "You saw his CAC card?" "Yes, Sergeant, but it could have been fake." "They're not," the sergeant stated flatly. "Not the new ones. Not with the chip and the hologram. Did you see his rank? Lieutenant Commander. That's an 04. That's a man who has dedicated more than a decade of his life to the service. A man in command. And you put him in cuffs because your gut told you to?" The sergeant shook his head slowly. "You didn't see a man. You saw a stereotype you had in your head, and you let your pride do the rest." Before the sheriff could respond, the front door of the station opened. 2 men entered. They didn't look like cops. They wore civilian suits that looked out of place in the small-town station. They moved with a quiet, focused confidence. One was older, with graying hair. The other was younger, with the fit build of an athlete. They walked directly to the sheriff's office. The older man showed his credentials. The gold shield read, Naval Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS. "Sheriff Miller," the lead agent said, his voice calm and professional. "I'm Special Agent Thorne. This is Special Agent Davies. We've been instructed by the Department of the Navy, in coordination with the Department of Justice, to take possession of all evidence pertaining to the detainment of Lieutenant Commander Adrian Foster." The sheriff blinked. NCIS agents here, in his station. They must have been dispatched from Las Vegas or even farther the moment the Broken Arrow call was confirmed. The Navy wasn't just fixing the problem, they were now controlling the investigation. "Evidence?" the sheriff asked, though he already knew the answer. Agent Thorne's eyes went to the body camera and dash cam card sitting on the desk. "That would be a good start. We'll need the full, unedited footage from both devices. We'll also need Deputy Larson's service weapon for ballistics, and we'll need to impound his patrol vehicle. And of course," he added, turning his gaze to Blake Larson, who looked as if he were about to be sick, "we will need a formal statement from the deputy, in a federal building, with his lawyer present." The message was brutally clear. This was no longer a local personnel issue. It was not an internal affairs investigation that could be handled with a suspension or a reprimand. Blake Larson was not just a deputy who had made a mistake. He was now the subject of a federal criminal investigation. The wheels of one of the most powerful investigative bodies in the military were beginning to turn, and they were grinding directly towards him. The quiet arrival of the NCIS agents was the second thunderclap in a storm that had started with a single phone call, and it was far from over. The unblinking, high-definition eye of Officer Larson's body camera told the story with a clarity that no human testimony could match. 2 days later, in a sterile conference room at the federal courthouse in Las Vegas, the footage was played on a large screen. In the room were 2 U.S. attorneys from the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, NCIS Special Agents Thorne and Davies, and a stone-faced lawyer representing Lincoln County. Sheriff Miller and Sergeant Miller were there as well, having been subpoenaed as witnesses. The video was damning. It began with the pretext stop, the innocuous conversation about the taillight. But the audio captured the subtle shift in Larson's tone the moment Foster identified himself as a Navy pilot. The professional courtesy evaporated, replaced by a challenging, condescending edge. The camera showed Foster's hands, slow and visible as he reached for his documents. It showed the military ID, clear as day, in Larson's hand. The camera lens was just inches from the holographic seal and the bold text reading, U.S. Navy. Then came the most incriminating part. After Larson walked back to his patrol car, he had forgotten to mute his radio transmission to dispatch. The dashcam audio, synced with the bodycam footage, picked up his words perfectly. "Dispatch, I've got a guy out here on 375, Larson's voice said, dripping with disdain. "Claims he's some hotshot Navy pilot, a lieutenant commander, driving a beat-up Mustang. Yeah, right. More like stolen valor. One of these arrogant flyboys who thinks the rules don't apply to him. I'm gonna teach him a little lesson about respect for the badge." A collective sigh went through the room. It was the smoking gun. The audio proved, beyond any doubt, that Larson's actions were not based on a reasonable suspicion or a concern for officer safety. They were premeditated, born of a personal bias and a desire to abuse his authority to humiliate someone he resented. The footage continued. It showed Foster's calm compliance, his hands on the dash. It captured Larson's shouted orders and the metallic click of the handcuffs. The attorneys watched the entire 20-minute ordeal, from the initial stop to the moment Foster drove away. They didn't just have a case. They had a textbook example of deprivation of rights under color of law. The audio from the dashcam confirms intent, the lead U.S. attorney, a sharp woman named Maria Flores, stated as the video ended. He wasn't investigating a crime, he was acting on a prejudice. He used his badge to settle a personal score with a phantom. Agent Thorne placed a file on the table. "We've also pulled Deputy Larson's record. On paper, it's clean. But we spoke with Sergeant Miller, who noted 3 informal complaints over the last 2 years. Never formally filed, but noted in the shift logs. All involving confrontational traffic stops with out-of-state drivers of expensive or high-performance vehicles. A pattern of challenging individuals he perceives as arrogant or rich. It appears Lieutenant Commander Foster fit his profile." Sheriff Miller looked down at the table, his face etched with shame. His deputy hadn't just made a mistake. He demonstrated a pattern of behavior that was a liability to his entire department. Attorney Flores turned to the county's lawyer. "Here is where we are," she said, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. "The Department of Justice is prepared to file federal charges against former Deputy Larson. Title 18, Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law. We will also be adding a charge of making a false statement to a federal officer, as his initial report, filed before he was suspended, claims Lieutenant Commander Foster was non-compliant and belligerent, which the video evidence clearly contradicts." She paused, letting the weight of the federal charges sink in. "Furthermore, the Department of the Navy is preparing a civil suit against Lincoln County for the unlawful detainment of a federal officer and the temporary compromise of a national security asset. The damages they are seeking will be, and I quote, the Navy's legal counsel, astronomical." The county lawyer swallowed hard. A federal criminal trial followed by a massive civil suit from the DOD would bankrupt the county. "What's the alternative?" he asked. "There is no alternative for Mr. Larson," Flores stated coldly. "He will face charges. The evidence is absolute. For the county, however, the Navy is willing to discuss a settlement. It will involve a significant monetary payment, a formal public apology to Lieutenant Commander Foster and the United States Navy, and the immediate implementation of a new federally supervised training protocol for all deputies regarding interaction with military personnel. This protocol will be designed by NCIS and the Judge Advocate General's Corps. It will be mandatory. It will be non-negotiable." The evidence wasn't just a video on a screen. It was an unblinking, impartial witness that had not only proven Foster's innocence, but it also laid bare the rot of arrogance and prejudice in a man who had been given a badge and a gun. The lesson Larson had intended to teach Lieutenant Commander Foster about respect was about to be turned back on him with the full, crushing force of the United States federal government. The fallout was swift and decisive. Blake Larson was terminated from the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department the next day. A federal grand jury indicted him less than a week later. Faced with the undeniable video and audio evidence, he accepted a plea bargain. He pled guilty to 1 count of felony deprivation of rights under color of law. The judge, a former Air Force colonel, sentenced him to 36 months in federal prison. His law enforcement career was over. His life was irrevocably changed. Lincoln County, facing financial ruin from the impending civil suit, settled with the Department of the Navy for $2.5 million. The money was quietly funneled into a Navy Marine Corps Relief Society fund that supports veterans and their families. The county also issued a formal public apology, which was read on the steps of the courthouse by a humbled Sheriff Miller. But the most significant change wasn't financial or punitive. It was procedural. The incident gave birth to what became known as the Guardian Protocol, a new joint training initiative between the Department of Defense and law enforcement agencies in communities surrounding major military installations. The protocol, designed by a team from NCIS and JAG, used the footage of Larson's traffic stop as its primary case study. It trained officers on how to properly verify military credentials, understand the unique legal status of active duty personnel, and de-escalate situations involving service members. The core message was simple. A military ID is not a challenge to your authority, it's a statement of fact, backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. 3 months after the incident, Lieutenant Commander Adrian Ace Foster stood before a new class of Top Gun pilots. He was back in his element, a green flight suit zipped up, a pointer in his hand, standing in front of a massive screen displaying the tactical layout of a simulated dogfight. He never spoke of the incident on the highway. It was a closed chapter. His focus was where it had always been, on the mission, on training the next generation of aviators to be the best in the world. His vindication wasn't in the courtroom or in the headlines. It was in the quiet professionalism with which he returned to his duty. The chain of command had been tested, and it had held. It had protected its own, not through emotion or anger, but through the cold, efficient application of protocol and power. It had worked exactly as it was designed to. The story of the traffic stop on Route 375 became a quiet legend, a cautionary tale told in police academies and military briefing rooms. It was a stark reminder of a simple truth. Authority is a responsibility, not a weapon. And sometimes, the quietest man in the room is the one with the most powerful friends. The system had been challenged by the arrogance of one man, and the system had won. What truly drove Officer Blake Larson's actions that day on that sun-bleached highway? It wasn't a simple mistake or a lapse in judgment. It was a textbook case of what psychologists call insecure overcompensation. Larson, a young officer in a small, isolated county, likely harbored a deep-seated resentment for the perceived elites he saw in the sky above him every day, the Top Gun pilots. They represented a level of achievement, status, and natural authority that he felt he lacked. When he pulled over Lieutenant Commander Foster, he didn't see a public servant. He saw a symbol of everything he wasn't. Foster's extreme calm, a product of his rigorous training, was misinterpreted by Larson as arrogance. It was a mirror held up to his own insecurity. The arrest wasn't about enforcing the law. It was an attempt to assert dominance, to tear down a symbol, to make the big man small. By putting Foster in handcuffs, Larson was, for a brief moment, putting his own feelings of inadequacy in chains. Could Foster have done anything differently? In a hypothetical world, Perhaps a more conversational, less formal approach might have disarmed Larson. If he had said, "Hey man, sorry about the light, long day at the base," instead of a crisp, "Negative, officer," would it have changed the outcome? Possibly. But we must also recognize a critical truth. When someone is determined to see you as a threat or a target for their own insecurities, de-escalation can be impossible. Foster's training was to comply and control the situation through procedure. In this scenario, that was the only correct path. Arguing or resisting would have only validated Larson's fabricated narrative and could have ended in tragedy. Foster's greatest strength was his discipline, and his ultimate protection was not his own actions, but the institutional power of the uniform he wore. The lesson for anyone in a similar situation is stark. You cannot reason with an irrational actor who holds all the immediate power. You can only survive the encounter and trust that a just system will hold them accountable later. The story of Adrian Foster is exceptional not because of the injustice, but because of the response. It stands as a powerful testament to the unbreakable integrity of the military's chain of command and its unwavering creed of leaving no one behind. But it also forces us to ask a difficult question. What if he hadn't been a Top Gun instructor? What if he were a junior sailor, an Army private, or an ordinary civilian without a direct line to the Pentagon? The machine of justice worked for him because his value was immediately recognizable to the system. The true moral of this story is not just that accountability exists, but that it should not be dependent on the victim's rank or status. Justice should be a right, not a privilege earned through service. This incident reminds us that while the chain of command can be a powerful force for good, the ultimate goal is a society where such a dramatic intervention is never necessary.
What do you think?
Has a uniform, any uniform, ever changed the way you were treated, for better or for worse? And where is the true line between enforcing authority and succumbing to arrogance? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters.